Hello, everyone. I'm Northern Westman, and you're listening to the Disciple Hour, episode 32. Today's topic is the Sabbath, and John Malt will lead the conversation. And I'm joined here by him and also by Ian. And I'll give the word over to you, John Malt.
Thank you. So today I have a specific Bible verse. I'll get to that in a minute. It's Mark 2:27 if you want to look up the verse or have the exact verse. But first I'll start with an example from real life. It's a sports example, actually. A lot of helpful examples come from sports. There was a hurdler, and this is a high school story from high school. There was a hurdler who was taught, as all hurdlers are, he was taught a step pattern because all hurdlers run an even number of steps between the hurdles. And if you don't get into an 8-step pattern or a 7-step pattern or whatever it is, it's very easy to get out of rhythm and trip over the hurdles and mess everything up. Well, in a race, he kept the pattern perfectly through all the hurdles. But then once the last hurdle was completed and there were no more hurdles, just a sprint to the finish line, he kept in his pattern even though it was slowing him down, and lost the race. And the coach afterwards said, why did you do that? What happened? I know you could sprint faster than that. And the kid said, well, I had to keep my pattern, didn't I? And the coach said, no, you didn't. The pattern is for the hurdles. And if it's not helping you anymore, if it's hindering you, then you don't keep it. You disregard it. It's for you. It's to help you, not to hinder you, not to hold you back. You don't have to keep that pattern just because. This isn't rules for the sake of rules. I guess that needed to be explained to some kids. That example is loosely related to what I'm talking about today. This verse, Mark 2:27, when Jesus said, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." So just a brief background. The Pharisees, like they always were, they were always seeking occasion to catch Jesus in some kind of blasphemy or breaking some kind of rule. And I actually don't remember who he healed. It was, I think it was the blind man, one of the blind men that he healed. He spit on the ground and made clay and wiped it on the man's eyes, and then the man was able to see. But the Pharisees said, well, you healed on the Sabbath. That's breaking one of the rules. And also you made clay. That counts as work. so that's a rule that you broke too. And there might have even been something else. And Jesus responded, as he always does, with very good examples, sometimes scriptural. But this time he responded with, which of you, if one of your calves fell down a well, would not pull him out, even if it was the Sabbath? Of course you would. You're not breaking the Sabbath by doing that. The Sabbath is, well, there's a lot of reasons for it. It's to bring you back to God. It's to make you more spiritual if you weren't throughout the week. If you were focused on work and business throughout the week, the Sabbath is to bring you back to God. Those are the reasons why it's not right to work on the Sabbath, or to be materialistic or to seek profit. But if you're just healing a man or saving his life or pulling a calf out of the well, that is not breaking the Sabbath. You're not doing it for profit. You're not doing it for some selfish, materialistic, or vainglorious reason. You're doing it to help somebody, to save someone's life. So that is not at all against the spirit of the Sabbath. And here we're going back to the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. The Pharisees only cared about the letter of the law. Jesus taught the spirit of the law. This is not rules for the sake of rules. This is not something we have to follow even to the death. if you're having a heart attack, but you can't, if grandma's having a heart attack, you say, sorry, grandma, I'm going to church. You're on your own. No, not at all. It is perfectly lawful and moral to help your grandma on the Sabbath if she's sick. So hopefully you see what I'm getting at here. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. You don't have to die in an extreme case in an attempt to keep the Sabbath. You don't have to lose your own life or somebody else's because it's the Sabbath and you have to go to church. Now, 99% of the time, we don't have an excuse to, say, skip church or go shopping on Sunday or seek profit on the Sabbath. But there are occasions where those activities are justified. If they're not for selfish reasons, if they're not for materialistic, vain reasons, if you're trying to save a life or to help somebody, in those extreme situations, that those actions are justified, even if it is the Sabbath. So that's the opening to the discussion here. And again, that verse is Mark 2:27, where Jesus said, "The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath." Keep in mind the hierarchy. Man is the hierarchy here. Man is the end goal here. Life is the end goal, and salvation, not rules for the sake of rules.
All right then. But what's the point of the Sabbath then? Is this a day that we're not supposed to be materialistic, that we are supposed to be spiritual and connect more with God? Why did God specifically make this day for man?
Well, I think it goes back to creation. On the seventh day, God rested. I think that's like the ultimate origin of the Sabbath, to commemorate and remember that day in creation. But I know it's also to bring us back to God spiritually if we have strayed throughout the week, or if we have just been too busy to be all that spiritual. If we've just been working throughout the other 6 days, it's to bring us back to God spiritually and to keep us within the Word, to set aside a day to hear the Word, and a day that we are not permitted to be selfish, I guess, for lack of a better word. Ideally, nobody would be seeking profit on Sunday. Nobody would be going shopping at the mall on Sunday. And most, at least here in the United States, almost all businesses were closed on the Sabbath well into the 1970s, which we're not old enough to remember. But we know from our fathers that this going to the mall on Sunday is a very modern and recent tradition, and a bad tradition. So to not stray too far from your question, the Sabbath is meant to bring us back to God spiritually, and in all other ways, to get us to remember what's really important in life. It's not our profit or our bills or our possessions. It's our salvation.
I ask because even King David, he violated the Sabbath by eating the showbreads in the temple in 1 Samuel 21, verses 1 to 6. He was waging war, and he and his men, they ate the showbreads because allegedly they were hungry. And Jesus even told the Pharisees this story when they were asking him why he was eating the wheat in the wheat fields with his disciples. And Jesus also asked they were trying to get Jesus, as you mentioned, but he always got them in return. For example, the law is kind of broken. It's not perfect in a way that you have to sometimes violate the law to keep the law. And an example of that would be to circumcise your son on the 8th day, even though it's the Sabbath. So you have to violate the law by violating the Sabbath in order to keep the law, to circumcise a male infant on the 8th day. And there were a few examples like that. And the Sabbath has always been, I was just going to say, the Sabbath has always been difficult to fully grasp for me. And so the Sabbath is made for us. So do we have the freedom then to kind of keep the Sabbath like the way we want? So we're not bound by this law to just do nothing, do absolutely nothing. I mean, Jesus, he worked by picking the wheat from the wheat fields. And like you said, he made clay, he healed people. And King David, he even waged warfare on the Sabbath. And that was in the Old Testament. Okay. But are we, is it necessary for us to attend church on a Sunday or on the Sabbath? Even if the churches in many places are spiritual deserts? These are just genuine questions I have, and I would like both of you to jump in.
Let me just say something quickly. Your first question about the circumcision on the 8th day, that I would say is an instance of competing laws. We have two laws that are against each other in this case. I mean, we have to keep the Sabbath, but we also have to circumcise on the 8th day. So what if those 2 days fall on the same day? What do we do? I think that's kind of an exception, kind of a rare exception of competing laws and which one takes precedent over the other. Most of the time, that's probably not what we're up against. Most of the time, I'd say probably a judgment call. Is what we want to do important enough to justify breaking the Sabbath in the letter? Are we sick enough to go to the doctor on the Sabbath? Are we sick enough to go to the pharmacy and buy medication? Are we hungry enough to eat something that we normally wouldn't eat? There are usually judgment calls. I think there are usually these borderline judgment cases where it's probably left to our own conscience. It is kind of a gray area, I admit. But a lot of times I think we're up against either a judgment call or, like you said, with the circumcision, just in that case, a rare instance of competing laws and which one takes precedent.
Ian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, is the question we're asking like whether it's sinful not to keep the Sabbath? I remember you said you raised that question. I mean, like, I don't think it's, I'm actually kind of looking through the Old Testament as we're speaking here, and I'm finding verses like in Jeremiah, they talk about keeping the Sabbath day holy by not doing any work. In Exodus, when the Lord gives Moses the commandments, this is Exodus 31, and this is, I'll read from the NIV just so there's no confusion here. He says, "Say to the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. Observe the Sabbath because it is holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. Those who do any work on that day must be cut off from their people. For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day is to be put to death. Yeah, it's repeating, but it will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. I mean, it seems that the Sabbath really is sort of an echo of God himself, how he believes how there's a day to rest and to sort of I think maybe you could see it as like a day of reflection and a day of appreciation for what was achieved and what was accomplished. And you know, I don't think I think it's a sign that God made us not to be constantly working and striving at every time, but rest and reflection and contemplation. These are all parts of the Christian life, the spiritual life, and so I think it goes back to God gave us the Sabbath. It's for us. It's for our betterment spiritually. So, I mean, if you don't keep the Sabbath, if you don't do anything different on that day, I think you're hurting yourself. You're missing an opportunity to connect with God more, to be more, to partake of His blessings, to partake of His connection. Sorry if I'm not saying the right words here, but hopefully you get my meaning. Just that I think these all point to the way God designed us. And I remember one time, this is, I guess, kind of related. I remember hearing a man talk about how his father was a pastor, and he didn't believe in taking days off. He says, "Well, the devil never takes a day off. Why should I?" And so he said, then I realized maybe he shouldn't be my role model. And so God is our model. He took a day of rest even, so he wants us to do the same, because that's part of how he designed us. So I wouldn't say it's a sin not to keep the Sabbath, but it's a form of missing out on what he has to offer.
Yeah, you can argue that it's a good thing to keep it, but is it always necessary? And there are instances. Some people take it very seriously, and they think that you are committing a sin by not keeping it the quote unquote the right way. And what is the right way? And this story about King David, I can't get it out of my head. Him and his men eating the showbreads, which was not allowed, but they did it nonetheless, and God didn't seem to care, it seems. But recently I've been trying to keep the Sabbath holy, as is the commandment, keep the Sabbath day holy. And so how do you keep it holy? And when are you transgressing by not keeping it quote unquote holy? Maybe these things were obvious to the ancient Israelites, and since we're so demoralized and deracinated and just brought to our knees, we don't even know what holiness is anymore, or what God meant by it.
I mean, my understanding of the word holy is that means to be set apart. So yes, the Sabbath day is a day that's set apart from the other days, and that it has a very specific purpose. So I think you could understand holiness that way.
Yeah, about King David and the showbread, I did just remember that I think the only real sin he ever committed, the only serious sin that God remembers, was the time he got Uriah the Hittite killed. Do you remember that story? Uriah was the man whose wife David wanted, ended up being the mother of Solomon, I think. And so David sent Uriah. He ordered that Uriah the Hittite be put in the front row of the most dangerous battle, so that he would surely die. So he practically murdered him because he wanted his wife. So just
Yes,
a little
correct.
If you remember that, a little aside there, I think I remember reading that is the only true sin that he committed in his life. And if the matter of the showbread was a sin, I don't think God really remembered it or really held it against him, if that makes sense. But let me say it's usually it's usually a sin to break the Sabbath, and to give a good example, what I think is a good example, and it's it's another athletics instance, but this is a famous story. This actually happened in the early 1900s. If you know of a famous American movie called Chariots of Fire, it came out in, I think, the 1980s, early 80s. That was about two Olympians, one of whom, when he found out that his race was going to be on the Sabbath, he didn't run it. He refused to run his race on the Sabbath. He threw away years of training because he knew that he didn't have an excuse to break the Sabbath. And that is a true story. And I think it's very, inspiring. And when Jesus said that whoever gives up his life here on earth will gain 100-fold in heaven, I know that man is one of them, because he gave up a lot on principle, that it was wrong to compete on the Sabbath.
I doesn't he end up running the race anyway because someone convinces him, makes an argument to convince him to do it? I mean, it's more inspiring for his conviction than, like, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember offhand what the argument they used to convince him to run was, but he did eventually end up running the race and winning it.
I don't remember what happened in the movie, but I'm pretty sure in real life, I think he didn't. I think he refused to run it. I think his name was Eric Liddell, or it might have been the other one. I don't remember. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, it was Eric Liddell. I actually watched that movie not too long ago, but I, yeah, I don't know if the movie took some liberties with the story. I mean, it probably did, but yeah.
Well, judging from the this definition, Ian, that holy is simply set apart, uh, it would make sense to keep the Sabbath day then unique from all other days. And I know that some people, they try to do that by just cooking a better meal and just being with family and so on. Going to church, sure. But in my instance, I don't like going to church because they are sadly just spiritual deserts. I would rather just read the Bible on my own. But I can say that I may need to work on keeping the Sabbath then more unique, uh, making sure that this day stands out. And I'm not going to go into, if I need to go to the store, fine. Like, if I need milk, am I really gonna like skip drinking milk? Are you gonna take it to the level where you tear the toilet paper the day before? Some people may or may not do that. I don't know.
Is tearing the
But
toilet paper really that much work?
right. I mean, walking a few steps into the store to buy milk, are you not allowed to conduct business at all? Like, really? I don't
Of
know.
course, I guess the question I would ask from here is, I mean, if we had a truly Christian society, does that mean every store would be closed on the Sabbath? I mean, if
Probably
Yes,
you,
so, yeah.
they used to be. I mean, I think medical professionals are excused, and I think say utility providers, electric and gas and such, are excused. But no, there used to be virtually no stores open on Sunday, even supermarkets. It just wasn't. It just didn't happen. I mean, and this went on into the 1970s, from from what I've been told. And then well, I won't get into the story of how it happened the way my father told me, but it kind of happened very quickly within a year or two. The whole culture changed. But for the majority of our history, virtually nothing was open on Sunday. Nothing fun or non-essential. At least it was the only things that were the only professionals that were doing business were people that were in the business of saving lives or maintaining life through electricity, gas, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I even remember back in the 90s, when I was living in the South, there was some rule. I'm not sure if it still exists today, but there's a rule that like on Sunday morning, alcohol can't be sold, and like that rule was still in effect within my adult memory, I guess. So, so yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if that law is still in the books today, but you just have some of these, within living memory, a lot of these things were in effect. Also, a quick side note about Chariots of Fire. If I remember correctly, what they did to get him to run was they had him run a race that was on a different day. That wasn't the Sabbath, so he could still
Yeah,
compete.
I just looked it up. He ran on Thursday. A teammate
Right.
worked out a rotation with me. He said, "Look, you could have my place on Thursday. That way, you could still compete on the team, and you won't have to break the Sabbath."
Yeah, so he still kept it holy. That was good. But as for the subject of keeping the Sabbath day distinct, yeah, I understand what Northern Westman is saying about sometimes churches, they do feel a bit empty nowadays, and it's hard to find good ones. Like I definitely understand that, which is why I don't attend church every Sunday sometimes, because it doesn't quite have the same depth as you would like, or as you might ideally like. But you know, through my over the years, I have set the Sabbath apart in certain ways, just like meeting with friends online, having discussions online with people on Sundays, and so I think that I don't think that that doesn't count. I think that that's something that that definitely makes it a special day and sets it apart for spiritual reflection. And you know, I think that the main point of the Sabbath being made for man, though, is that we should strive to have this day of the week that is a day for spiritual reflection and to be not just another business day, not just another work day, but something that's a day that's for us to connect with the Lord. So however you do that, it's closer. It's what am I trying to say? It's getting to God's ideal.
Yeah, about the churches, at what point are you? At what point should you not go to church if it's so bad? I think that's another judgment call. There are so many churches out there, and all churches are imperfect because we are all fallen and sinners to some degree. But there are definitely some that are just truly bad churches. I mean, if they have a rainbow flag flying out front, or I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Some of them are just awful. And at what point are you? Sh- should you just walk away from a church and, if necessary, have no church? It's probably a judgment call. I know people who have done it, but in each individual instance, I don't know that there's a blanket rule that we could apply. I think it's just a judgment call in between you and your conscience and between you and God, because all churches are different.
I could tell you this funny story about my grandma's funeral the other day. The priest really, she didn't know what she was talking about. Female priest, welcome to Iceland. The state church. She mentioned Matthew 25, the story of the master and his 3 servants. He gives them talents. He gave 5 talents to one of them, 2 talents to another, and 1 talent to the third guy. Every man according to his several ability, that is. And then he went out on a journey. And the guy with 5 talents, he earned interests on them, and he made another 5 talents. The same guy with the 2 talents, he made another 2. But the third guy, he buried his 1 talent into the ground. And later, when the master comes home, he returns and he asks them what they have done with their talents. And the first 2, they tell him, we earned interests on them, and he is very happy with them. And he blesses them. But the third guy, he tells him, oh, I was afraid, and so I buried your talent. And the master becomes very angry with him, calls him a wicked and an evil servant. No, sorry, wicked and lazy. And he takes his talent from him and gives it to the one who has now 10 talents. And he casts him into the darkness, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And the priest in the funeral, she actually interpreted this story as merely talents, as in skill sets. Oh, God gives us all skill sets, and we're supposed to make good of our skills. And I really don't think that is the point with this parable. It is about God's gifts, God's blessings. And if you just bury your blessing in the ground, you don't do anything with it, God is not going to be happy with you on Judgment Day. But if you multiply these blessings and, quote unquote, earn interests on them, you multiply them, then he'll be happy. He'll be very happy with you. And so this was just an example of churches just being way too materialistic, and how this priest could really not see the dire warning at the end of this parable. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Multiple gospels record this exact sentence: weeping and gnashing of teeth. Word for word, identical. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. That indicates that Jesus probably told them many times, weeping and gnashing of teeth, a dire warning. And all his apostles anyway, disciples, because Matthew wasn't an apostle, all his disciples, they all got it. They got the message, the dire warning, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Some will not enter heaven. And how this priest could have missed that is astounding to me. Now, is that a reason enough not to attend church? Maybe not. Maybe I should give them more chance, but I'm just so sick and tired of the churches. And maybe, I'm just being honest here, folks. Maybe I'm being a hypocrite since I'm not keeping the Sabbath holy in a way that I'm setting it really apart from other days. Sundays are kind of identical to Saturdays for me, I guess. Although I do read the Bible sometimes, but it's not like It's not unique, distinct. So maybe I have the beam standing out of my own eye when I'm noticing the tiny splinter in my neighbor's eye. I don't know. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right that the parable of the talents does not only apply to money. I think you're right. It is more than just financial interest. You want to earn interest on all your gifts, all your talents, whether your personal gifts, your interpersonal gifts. It's not just a matter of literal monetary interest. It does extend to the personal realm and the spiritual realm also. If your preacher thought it only meant literal financial interest, that's a big misconception, I'd say. About the churches though, yeah, again, they're all just there's so many different ones, and they're all varying degrees of bad in each individual instance. I all I could say is it's a case by case basis. It's between you and your conscience, between you and God. If you do leave your church and end up going to no church, there are still things you could do. You could help the poor, donate your time and effort in some way. You could always read the Bible. No matter who you are, you could always read the Bible. Anybody anywhere can read the Bible these days. There are other ways to keep the Sabbath other than just physically going to a church, in the case that's not proper anymore.
This group, Western Kind for Christ, this was in a way a home church, an online church, a very small but dedicated individuals who, many of us are just new to the faith. Some have been Christians since birth. Many different denominations, but we are all, though, dedicated. And I personally, I'm still learning about the faith, and I am willing to take corrections. So if you people think that I'm sinning by not keeping the Sabbath day truly unique and distinct from other days, then I will really, I promise, I will take it into consideration and think about how I can keep it more unique and what I could do. And I would like, comments beneath this video, really, as this is such a topic that, some of our topics where we know exactly what we want to talk about, but some other episodes are more discussions like this one. We are really going here back and forth. We have genuine questions. Sometimes it is needed. But I can say for myself that I'm just being honest here. I don't really know how to keep the Sabbath. And I would like to learn how to keep it holy, and who knows? Hopefully, my life would improve. I know there's a known Jewish man named Dennis Prager who talked about some years ago about how he stopped keeping the Sabbath for a few weeks or maybe months. And he then just realized on some train travel in Finland, I believe, if I remember correctly, he stepped out of the train and realized it was his Sabbath, or what was supposed to be his Sabbath. And it like hit him that the Sabbath, it had just be, his life was so ordinary now. There was no uniqueness, there was no holiness, and it just hit him. And that was when he dedicated himself to keeping the Sabbath holy. And maybe I could learn something from him. Maybe I should do it. Keeping the Sabbath holy. Plan ahead what I'm going to do and what I'm going to cook and really keep the Sabbath day holy. And I could even report on it, like in a few weeks, report on how I'm doing. Thoughts on that?
That thing about Dennis Prager is interesting. Like how, I mean, as you mentioned, Dennis Prager, of course, who is Jewish. I mean, is his version of keeping the Sabbath different than what we as Christians might do? I mean, did he specify what he meant by keeping the Sabbath?
Well, he did not mention the toilet paper. Yeah.
I don't think all. I think that's only like the ultra orthodox Jews who do stuff like that. Yeah.
No, yeah, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he kept it very unique, and it stood out. You know, like you said, set apart. Really, that's what it is. Set apart.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should all try that. Just have a very specific goals for the Sabbath and see how that affects our lives. I mean, as for me, like I don't go to my regular job on Sundays, but sometimes I'll do other projects that I work on. But I could argue that I work on them because I enjoy them and they're my personal goals and they're things I want to get done and it's a time to do them. But maybe I am working on the Sabbath by doing them. So I have to really think about that.
It's absolutely a good project to commit to the Sabbath. Surely, I mean, there can only be a gain from it. And like you were saying, John Malt, just before the show, is really hard. How did you put it again? It's hard not to keep it. No, in like 99% of instances, you have no excuse to keep it. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's definitely a rare and extreme occasion where you would have to break the Sabbath, but people do have heart attacks. People do fall down wells, and there are occasions where something unexpected and very dire comes up, and in that case, you will hopefully live to attend Sabbath, attend church on another Sabbath, live to fight another day, as they say. And it is not selfish or materialistic or anything like that to save somebody or yourself on that day.
You guys kind of got me fired up. I am now thinking about ways to keep the Sabbath really holy and set apart from all other days. And I have a few ideas. I'll fill you in if I actualize any of them. Gentlemen, any final thoughts?
I think it's been a good discussion. I mean, it's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah, I hope everybody sees the Sabbath kind of in a different light after hearing this discussion. It is for you, but it is not for you to just do whatever you want. It's not a blank check to do whatever you want on the Sabbath. We don't follow rules anymore. That's the old covenant. No, that's not the message. The message is it's for you to become more spiritual and more reflective and more contemplative of your life and others' lives. And maybe once a year, that's going to mean taking somebody to the hospital or something of that nature. All other times, we're not going to be going to the mall. We're not going to be going to the movies or the bowling alley. We're going to be contemplating, praying, reading the Bible, and anything else that's wholesome and not materialistic and not just entertaining.
Amen to that. This has been a wonderful discussion, and thank you all for listening. I love you all. God bless every single one of you. And take care now. Bye-bye.
Bless.
But bye. God bless.